What I do want to highlight is we've got our trainers. They are ready, they are on stage, and we are about to tune in to our second top 8 bout.
Yeah, and we can start with the previous accomplishments from our players here that we're going to feature in this next top 8 game. Diego Gutierrez has got a lot of accolades to their name. Their top 4 regional finish at the Coribita Regional Championship, Sao Paulo Regional, top 8 2023, the Giovanna Regional top 8, which is a very recent regional that has happened, and the Santiago Regional Champion in 2022.
Yeah, Diego actually coming off from really strong performances, whilst we do, of course, have Jorijn over on his side of the field. In 2023, Bochum Regional top 32. We have actually become well acquainted with Jorijn. We know that he plays quite a bit with the local scenes, so being able to see him build up to this and come back is really nice to be able to witness.
Yeah, very strong player in his local region, and doing some very good things in and around the EU circuit as well. So really great to see him get this far in the tournament and getting to the top 8 to be featured here. Going to have a tough test in front of him with Diego that has got a pretty interesting team as well.
Yeah, and I think a couple of interesting members would... I'm going to have to start it off like this, Lee. It's the Ogi Dogi.
Of course it is.
Of course it is, right?
Very interesting Terra type on there, the water Terra typing, with that Drain Punch, going for that big damaging move in the Gunk Shot, the knockoff and the upper hand, and the most interesting thing, the Assault Vest item on there.
Yeah, Assault Vest and actually opting to go for the Water Terra in order to allow it to sponge up even more damage. This Pokemon is a nuisance to any sort of intimidate focuses. However, there are other Pokemon accompanied by itself, that Chi-Pow Focus Sash with the Stellar typing in order to capitalize off of even more damage output potential across all 3 of its offensive moves.
Yeah, and if you look at the team here from Diego, he's got pretty much 4 physical attackers, 5 if you're including the Chi-Pow. So really, a lot of options to take advantage of that Sword of Ruin ability. And also, if you notice down on the Rillaboom, the boosting power item in the Miracle Seed.
Right.
We've seen how effective that can be on the Rillaboom throughout this weekend. So, gonna have to be something that Jorijn really considers taking and having a lot of respect for in this set, because we know the damage increase that you're going to get under the grassy terrain is very significant.
I do find this team composition quite fascinating, hence because there's no speed control available at all. This feels like more of a reactive good stuff team, maybe trying to counter a bit of the meta and very popular Pokemon being utilized. You've got the Guard Dog ability on Ogi Dogi to allow itself to gain an attack boost, whilst the upper hand, it's so great in being able to flinch any offensive priority moves coming out from the opponent too.
Yeah, so Jorijn going to have to be very careful with that Guard Dog ability, obviously with the Intimidate on the Incineroar on its side of the field, and that comes out and activates that. It's giving a free attack boost, and you really don't want to be doing that to the Okidogi, especially if it's got the Chi-Pow next to it.
Yeah, I think that is something that will likely come into play given its availability in enabling its partner Pokemon. But, of course, we do have Jorijn's side of the field having the Roaring Moon, Porygon 2, Golden Go, Landorus, Incarnate, Incineroar, and the Amoonguss. And a couple of interesting items to call out. I think Boost Energy, sort of anticipated. We haven't seen Flying Terra, the Dragon Dance set for some time, I would say, or at least success for some time. But the Golden Go actually going for choice specs.
Yeah, really interesting item choice to boost the damage straight away from that Make It Rain. The Trick there is a nice option as well to catch unsuspecting foes off guard as well. And the Dazzling Gleam to play off that Fairy Terra typing. Really interesting choice there from Jorijn. The one thing that I would like to say is the Roaring Moon following suit from last year's EUIC Championships, because it was on the winning team.
Exactly.
Ultua used it. So funny that it is making its first appearance in the broadcast this weekend here in top 8. Could that be a sign? The other thing that I would like to point out is that Porygon 2, the Poison Terra type on it, taking advantage of that Terra Blast, not only when it's not Terastallized, but when it is Terastallized. A great Pokemon to put in front of something like the Flutterman that we've seen so much of this weekend, but not so much of in this matchup, Costa.
No, it has such great utility to it. Porygon 2 just really surprising a lot of us in its viability within this meta. It has a really solid place in allowing that sustainability role, Trick Room setup, and offensive pressure all in one, which is sort of why we're seeing it rise through the ranks.
Yeah, and we are just warming up now. Here we go into the game. And I mean, first, Lux, what are you thinking both players are going to rely on bringing in this set to give them a bit of a leg up as we go into game one?
I feel like there is enough room for the Chien Pao to definitely come. You want to be able to at least threaten both the Roaring Moon as well as the Landorus, perhaps force a terrestrialization from that side. Golden Go also does get immediately threatened by Sucker Punch, as we know it's choice specs, but there may be a bit of a mind game with that trick available to itself. But Hisuian Arcanine is looking very nice as well. You've got Intimidate. We know it's choice banded. It has that immediate pressure of threatening the KOs, and Head Smash is such a great burst damage move when it connects, in order to accompany not only by a choice band as well as that Sword of Ruin.
Yeah, and one thing that Jorijn could potentially do is look at taking advantage of maybe one of the speed control elements on his side of the field in the Trick Room with that Porygon 2, because to get that set up, the Amoonguss is then in a nice favorable position against pretty much everything on Diego's side of the field that will be slower than it under those Trick Room environments. So I think that's something that you could look at. Of course, you've got to be careful, because really your offensive output at that point, especially if the Okidogi does come onto the field for Diego, is probably quite limited. And I think at that stage, you'll have to really rely on the Amoonguss to provide coverage for the Porygon 2 to do the damage needed to that Okidogi. It is, of course, holding that Assault Vest, so not as easy as just setting the Trick Room up and saying you're in a great position to win, but it definitely is something that Jorijn could lean on. As you've said, there is a lack of speed control over on Diego's side of the field.
Yeah, I feel like it is a pretty solid strategy. You just need to be able to not allow Diego to have more of an advantage in the immediate effect. So the fact that you've got such offensive, immediate burst damage potential Pokemon means that, sure, your opponent could get the setup that they need, but you're dealing the damage, and the very big damage in this case. And if, for example, you know, your opponent wants to try to capitalize off the speed control, you've got options for switches. You've got options to be able to further expire those moves and take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think one thing you could really identify here for Jorijn is the fact that Landorus has a huge advantage over everything if it can remove the Chien Pao on Diego's side of the field. Remove that Pokemon, the Landorus is freed up pretty much to hit everything else on the team for super effective damage, covering between the Earth Power and that Sludge Bomb.
That's a really good shout. I do quite like it, but we're going to have to see if it's going to be brought. We do have game one of our second top 8. Diego leading with the Rillaboom and the Landorus Incarnate versus Jorijn's Amoonguss and the Porygon 2. Looking like there's a potential for Trick Room.
Yeah, there's definitely a potential for the Trick Room here. It does have to be careful with the fake out from that Rillaboom. It will prevent it from actually moving this turn, of course. But the Porygon 2 in a really nice position where it is able to soak up those damaging attacks. And the thing is, with the Landorus as well, it has to be careful if it does attack into that Porygon, then it is going to be susceptible to having a Spore thrown onto it from that Amoonguss here. So really needs to be careful. Maybe a substitute here is a good option, because then it gives you a nice option going into the next turn where potentially you don't have a way to stop that Trick Room being set up.
And it's quite an easy play to make if you are Diego. At least you could try to fake out onto the Porygon 2. We know it doesn't have Ghost Terra, so it's not going to be able to necessarily negate its effects. And Substitute at this current point allows you to be able to be immune to a fake out, which may be coming in from this very small, teeny tiny Incineroar.
Yeah, and it comes in, drops the Intimidate, more importantly onto the Rillaboom here. The fake out coming out from the Rillaboom into that Porygon 2 as that Substitute comes out from the Landorus, giving it a bit of a more flexible options going into this next turn. It's not going to be affected by that fake out that is an option for Jorijn on his side of the field with the Incineroar, and not going to be immediately threatened from that Porygon 2 that has access to that Ice Beam.
Yeah, and it's going to be able to go ahead and at least either force the Incineroar to terrestrialize or switch out, because Earth Power is relatively safe here if you want to try to pick up an immediate KO, but you've got options. You can try to target down the Porygon 2, perhaps anticipating the Incineroar to be a bit passive, not up to go for the fake out into the the Rillaboom and try to capitalize off of that and start slowing down Jorijn's available resources.
Yeah, and that's a really good option. Like you say, it's a pretty free Earth Power into that slot. I think if you are Jorijn, you've got to make a decision. Do you want to keep the Incineroar in to potentially take that? Do you want to Terrasilize? Do you want to switch it out into something like that Amoonguss that can maybe soak it up a little bit better while you try and get rid of that substitute or set the Trick Room up with that Porygon too?
Oh, but we do have a forced Terastallization with the Incineroar opting to go for the Grass type, which places it quite nicely to be able to resist any ground type moves coming out, as the Landorus does indeed focus into it. So really nice defensive play here from Jorijn, allowing himself to get a very good move off, even though that was a critical hit, so that was a lot of damage. Woodhammer trying to focus down as well, so perhaps reading into a likely read or a defensive switch in, but the most critical point of this situation is Incineroar does have a Citrus Berry, looks relatively safe, but the Porygon 2 has not been touched.
And the parting shot coming out into that Landorus, going through the Protect because it is a sound-based move, lowering the special attack and the attack on that Landorus Incarnate. Repositioning, going to be going into the back, saving that for later on and giving Jorijn the opportunity to bring something else more useful out onto the field now. A really nice positional sense with that Incineroar, using the Terastallization to soak up both of those attacks while the Landorus comes onto the field now, and that Trick Room is finally set up.
Yeah, a very nice play from Jorijn here, being able to all of a sudden take a situation where you got a Landorus, it has got a substitute up, but like you mentioned, it is still not immune, should I say, to a parting shot. It's susceptible to it. And Trick Room now being set up, maybe a bit of an indication that Landorus might be trained a bit more slower on Jorijn's side of the field, but you could easily try to opt to go for a switch out, get the fake out of the Incineroar back onto the field and get your own substitute set up.
Yeah, that's very true. And the Rillaboom, yeah, has been intimidated. It is going to put a little bit of pressure onto the Landorus here, but yeah, has to be careful, because if the Landorus is able to stick around from your inside the field and fire off a Sludge Bomb, spells a little bit of trouble for Diego. That's why we're seeing it switch out. The Okidogi coming back onto the field now. Landorus protecting, not wanting to contend with any damage, that being namely from a Terra Blast or an Ice Beam from this Porygon 2, as we are going to see that protection just go up, and the Terra Blast coming out.
Coming out, and of course hitting neutral for that Okidogi, dealing good damage in combination with the Sludge Bomb, guaranteeing a rough 2-hit KO, but thanks to the Grass Terrain recovery, it may likely actually get out of that range. So nice situation here. Jorijn, even though you got the Trick Room set up, the turns are starting to expire, you don't have anything directly threatening yourself prior to this Okidogi, but speed interactions are going to have to come into play here.
Yeah, and the Porygon 2 is going to be a little bit threatened now with a great switch from Diego, bringing that Okidogi onto the field. It does have access to that Drain Punch. It is going to threaten it pretty well. Has to be careful around that Earth Power from the opposing Landorus though, so it is checking it in a way, but you do have access to Terastallizing, which is what we're going to see. Maybe give a bit of alleviation from the threat of that Landorus and give you the option to either go for a knockoff, get rid of that Eviolite onto the Porygon 2, make it a lot easier to manage, or go for some big damage with a Drain Punch.
Yeah, in this scenario, Jorijn has already gone ahead and utilized their own Terastallization, so the Porygon 2 cannot get out of that fighting type weakness, hence why we had to switch up Amoonguss being able to sub in for itself. It can resist those fighting type moves, but Diego, on the other hand, trying to also make that adaptation play and get one step ahead in his board state, brings that Rillaboom, has fake out pressure, is resisting that Earth Power, and all of a sudden, it allows this Landorus to at least get some damage onto this Amoonguss.
Yeah, the Earth Power coming out from Diego's Landorus into the Amoonguss, catching that and doing about 40% damage. The Amoonguss able to handle that a lot better than some of the other options like the Incineroar that could have come in here, but Diego playing it very safe to try and stall out these Trick Room turns. The big thing is that he is able to keep a hold of that substitute so deep into this game after getting it set up. Jorijn not seeming to worry about getting rid of that, but you do want to prioritize getting rid of it, because then it opens up options for things like your Amoonguss, things like your Porygon that can come in and immediately threaten the Landorus. As long as that substitute is up, it is pretty much sitting happy behind that doll.
And from Diego's side, you really do want to try to utilize this Okidogi with the rotations of the Intimidate coming into play, maybe trying to get those Guard Dog boosts with the attack, and that essentially is a very good way to be able to counter Jorijn's sort of passive but longer sustainability play.
Yeah, we are going to see a Pollen Puff come into the Incineroar, utilized to support it this time around, topping up that HP as a Wood Hammer coming into that slot here, just doing a nice amount of damage, but really resisted here as another Earth Power fight out from this Landorus again into that Amoonguss, not taking it super well, but able to take it better than some options, of course. Now, the Amoonguss in range, probably from another Earth Power this next turn.
Yeah, definitely a battle of attrition right here. It sort of feels like both trainers are building up to the point where once they can try to get rid of that one Pokemon that sort of stops and slows down their strategy, we're going to see full throttle coming out from both of them in terms of offensive prowess. But Amoonguss can easily switch out right here for a Porygon 2 to either go for another setup of a Trick Room or even add on to its recover and sustainability and wear down Diego's resources over time.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing to really identify. It makes it a possibility here for you to go for a parting shot into the Landorus here if you are the Incineroar, just to lower the special attack power of that Landorus once again. Switching out the Amoonguss is a smart play. You activate that Regenerator. Also, if an Earth Power goes into that slot, then you avoid any of that damage as well. The Arcanine, Hisui Arcanine, coming onto the field for Diego here. Going to drop an all-important Intimidate onto that Incineroar, but it may be leaving the field. Going to be very threatened by that Landorus on your side the next turn. But a smart protect here from the Landorus on Diego's side, blocking a potential parting shot and keeping that substitute intact.
Ooh, as Flare Blitz is going to not only find an Intimidate drop on its side, it's going to go into that ×4 resisted Hisuian Arcanine. So we've got that immediate burst damage available from Diego's side, but the real question is here, does it outspeed the Landorus? Are you in a relatively safe position, or do you feel that the terrestrialization is appropriate in order to start removing the pieces that Jorijn has available on their board?
I mean, you could go into this next turn if you are Jorijn and you feel comfortable about it, where you think the Arcanine's probably going to switch out. You could go for the Earth Power if you're confident that you do outspeed. I think that's the big question. Do you outspeed the Hisuian Arcanine? Because if you don't, you're going to look at maybe taking a loss to your Incineroar, and that's one of your important pieces gone. We are going to see a Sludge Bomb come out, though, from the Landorus into the Incineroar, doing some good damage there, ticking down below 50% health.
And there's no terrestrialization. Head Smash comes out. It does outspeed the Landorus. It doesn't pick up the KO, just barely misses it, but it is now susceptible to this return KO. Earth Power, and all of a sudden, where it was passive and pivoting and whatnot, it's all of a sudden exploded into our first KO of this game one.
A huge survival here from the Landorus, able to take that massive choice-banded Head Smash, followed up now by a parting shot again onto this behind the substitute Landorus Incarnate, lowering that special attack one more stage, putting down the -2. Not going to be hitting as hard. Saw the Sludge Bomb that last turn, how much damage it did. It's going to be hitting less going into this one. Porygon 2 back on the field, going to be in a position where it can go for another Trick Room and start to deal with this Landorus Incarnate.
And it has gotten the special attack boost via the download ability. So Okidogi is in a spot where it could come back onto the field and at least now try to benefit off of any future Intimidates that do come out, because let's not forget, everybody, Diego does have that terrestrialization option still available. But the Landorus on Diego's side, most likely, at least for now, outspeeding the Landorus. Over on Jorijn's side, we did see that interaction being an indication that both of the Hisuian Arcanine and the Landorus were outspeeding Jorijn's Landorus, which means that that HP should surely allow a very swift KO.
Got to worry, though, because the Sludge Bomb's not going to be super effective. It probably is going to be enough, but it does have to cross your mind. You're -2 at the moment with that Landorus Incarnate on Diego's side of the field. Would it be enough? We're not going to see that anyway. Nice safe play here from Jorijn, bringing in the Amoonguss. Going to be able to soak up whatever we see in that Sludge Bomb exactly into that slot so well.
So well, but how much damage is going to be dealt from this Okidogi? Actually trying to benefit and prioritize knocking off that Eviolite rather than getting the Drain Punch and getting subsequently the HP recovery. So wanting to at least allow any hard-hitting Pokemon Diego has available to get rid of the Porygon 2 as quick as possible.
Yeah, really nice move there from Diego. Just taking things a bit slower, not wanting to dive in straight away with the Drain Punch, getting more use out of that turn, getting rid of the Eviolite is going to be proving dividends as we go into the rest of this match. Much easier to deal with because of the recovery option that the Porygon 2 has. Have to worry, though, you've got the perfect support option next to it in that Amoonguss, where it can just redirect any of those really threatening attacks in the Drain Punch, in the Gunk Shot, or anything like that in its direction. And it also has access to the Rocky Helmet, so you will be getting a little bit of chip damage for any trouble.
However, the Spore does connect, of course, with this Okidogi. It could not get away from that scenario. Maybe Diego trying to rely on a play coming out from that side, maybe trying to target down the Landorus, but the Ice Beam deals respectable amount of damage onto this Assault Vest Okidogi. It's not only put to sleep, it's been dealt a lot of damage, putting it within another potential range of a Terra Blast normal type from this Porygon 2.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think with the +1 special attack that we got the last time the Porygon came onto the field, it's going to prove really useful in dealing with this Okidogi, and now is asleep. You've got to contend with Fake Out this turn from the Rillaboom, but it doesn't really pose an immediate threat here. It's got to worry about the Amoonguss as well, because the Amoonguss has access to that Pollen Pluff. It could go for that into the Rillaboom. It's probably a 2-hit KO from this range, and I think if you are Jorijn, you don't really want to be bringing in your Incineroar at this stage. You don't want to activate that Guard Dog ability while the Okidogi is still active on the field.
It feels like Diego is putting all of his eggs in the basket of the Rillaboom, wanting to be the main source of offensive pressure onto this Porygon 2, perhaps later on down the line. But Fake Out targeting it, not allowing it to move, at least for this turn. Pollen Puff trying to whittle down Rillaboom's HP essentially, but Okidogi most importantly has been able to come one step closer to waking up. So Diego's going to really have to hope that the luck of the dice does roll in his favor.
Yeah, and you're in a really tricky position here with the Rillaboom now, because I think you're going to need another Pollen Puff and potentially a Terra Blast or an Ice Beam into that slot to pick up the knockout. You're safer going for the Terra Blast, of course, because if the Terrestrialization comes out from the Rillaboom, then it's going to take it a lot better than anything else would. So, and it makes it difficult for Diego to switch at this point as well, because if you do switch into the Landorus in that slot to potentially take the Pollen Puff a little bit better, you run the risk of running into an Ice Beam as well. It's going to be super effective against that Pokemon.
Yeah, and what I've noticed, Lee, is this Porygon 2 just is staying on the field in such an incredible way, where even though Trick Rooms are being set up, it's still dealing the damage it really needs to.
Yeah, we see the Rage Powder come out. Not going to be affected by the Rillaboom. Maybe predicting a Terrestrialization here as the Terra Blast comes out from the Porygon 2. More than enough to take down this Rillaboom. Take Jorijn one step closer to closing this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, now forcing Diego to not have any remaining switches sort of puts himself to the point where Jorijn is completely capitalizing off of being able to whittle down all of these resources. You saw it in Diego's face there. The Okidogi being put to sleep really slowed down any sort of efforts in order to break down this core 4 that Jorijn has been piloting.
Yeah, now the Lander is coming in a really not favorable position here, where an Ice Beam will be enough to take it down. And you've got the Amoonguss there perfectly positioned with that Rage Powder. The only thing you would say that is falling in Diego's favor is he still has that Terrestrialization to take advantage of. The Landorus has the Steel Terra type, so it can go for that. It will then resist the Ice Beam and the Terra Blast coming out from the Porygon 2, but does have to be wary, again, about a potential Spore coming out into that slot, because at the moment, we are seeing the Amoonguss going to be the fastest thing on the field.
It will be, so Jorijn does have routes to be able to identify the Terrestrialization. It hasn't been utilized at all from Diego to this point. It may be able to catch him off guard. However, Jorijn at this point seems like he's got a really good comprehensive understanding over the board state.
Yeah, and definitely really not having to rush himself in any sort of situation here. We do see the Terrestrialization from this Landorus Incarnate go for that Steel Terra type. A Rage Powder come out from the Amoonguss, going to draw all attacks to that side of the field. The Terra Blast again coming out from the Porygon 2. Not quite enough into the Okidogi, but it does wake up. It goes for the Drain Punch, not effective into that Amoonguss. Now everything down to the Landorus. Will it be able to get enough damage into the Amoonguss?
Even though it's going to be recovering a tiny bit of HP, that Rocky Helmet does come into effect and lower it even further. But the most crucial thing here is the substitute. It has now been set up. You at least will be able to completely negate the spores. This Landorus does not have a special attack drop at all. It will be dispatching the usual ridiculous amount of damages that it can, and we are outside of Trick Room. So Landorus is really in its element right now.
Yeah, but I think the one problem is, do you have enough firepower are to get rid of the Amoonguss this turn between the Landorus. Well, with the Landorus to then utilize the Drain Punch from the Okidogi to get some health recovery, because the Landorus misses the knockout here. You're going to see it double up into the Amoonguss. It might go down, but that might be enough, and what Jorijn is risking to get that Trick Room set up.
Oh, and it is enough. The Amoonguss does go down, which allows the Okidogi to get even more recovery. Who knows? Maybe even a KO as this Eviolite. It has been knocked off. We're going to have to see it.
It's a huge knockout.
That is such a huge KO, because all of a sudden now you're leading to the point where the Landorus and the Incineroar over on Jorijn's side that will be coming in. Sure, they've got Fake Out, but the most crucial thing is that Landorus can be taken down just with one attack, focusing onto it, and it is slower than Diego's Landorus.
Yeah, and we know that the parting shot drops from earlier have been reset on Diego's side of the field. It's got the substitute backup now in a prime position, not going to be threatened by that Fake Out when the Incineroar comes onto the field, in a great spot to just get rid of the Landorus, and then it sets you up to easily deal with that Incineroar.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Upper Hand is available on the Okidogi. It can shut down this Fake Out immediately if Jorijn tries to focus down onto it. So there are still a couple of mind games, but at the moment, it feels like Diego has a slight, no pun intended, upper hand.
Definitely has the upper hand. Are we going to see it locked in here to try and maybe counteract a Fake Out from this Incineroar? It's more likely that we probably don't here, but like you say, on its last legs, the Incineroar on your own side of the field, players taking their time to lock in their options, not want to rush into anything. Consider every option here. Fake Out coming out, stopping the Okidogi, attacking this turn.
As the Sludge Bomb will be focusing onto the opposing Landorus, it does pick up the KO, and this is looking like it is Diego's game, being able to bring it back from the realm of defeat. We see the timer counting down to the final 2 remaining minutes, and your time over on Diego counting down to roughly 35 seconds.
Wow, so close, such fine margins. The Sludge Bomb coming out. Diego taking game 1 in this slogfest.
Yeah, it really was a slogfest, but being able to keep your cool going through this is a virtue of such a great trainer, and that is why both of them are in the position they are with this top 8 at the European International Championships. And there was a lot of back and forth there that we could go over into detail, but the main key moments that we did highlight was that grass terrestrialization option allowed Jorijn's Incineroar to survive the sort of onslaught focus of the Wood Hammer and the Earth Power.
Yeah, and that was a huge turn here. The Incineroar taking that Earth Power, like we see here, so comfortably known to get knocked out from that attack, which then allowed it to get that parting shot off the initial one into that Landorus Incarnate, which then slowed it down and eventually put it into the position where it had to switch out from Diego. Maybe you look back at the match, a detriment to Jorijn overall, because then if you'd been able to deal with this Landorus Incarnate a little bit earlier, it would have taken one option off the field for you to have to consider dealing with later on in this match.
And there were quite a few nice plays there, side Pollen Puff, but this head smash didn't quite pick up the KO. We did see that the Arcanine did outspeed, being that indication of training with the speed benchmarking, that Landorus over on Jorijn's side is indeed slower, hence why we've got the Trick Room available.
Yeah, and I think one thing we can do going into this game too, especially if you're Jorijn, you've got a better idea of the speed kind of matchups here in this match, so it might make it more comfortable for you to really commit to that Trick Room as early on as possible and not give room to things like that Landorus Incarnate like you did so much in that game. You don't have to worry about the Arcanine so much as well if you get your Landorus onto the field in the position where it can deal with the Okidogi that was so problematic. You can deal with the Landorus Incarnate if it does decide to terrestrialize because of the threat from the Porygon 2, and you can also deal with that Arcanine because you know the speed interaction there. You are slower than it if the Trick Room's not set.
And it sort of shows why it's so crucial to at least pick up 1 KO with this sort of matchup between the trainers, as it creates a systematic failure of a team composition, at least when it comes to Jorijn's side, where they rely on each other, whether through the means of utility of Fake Out pressure. We've got the Trick Room set up, we've got the redirection available over on Amoonguss. It has that great utility of the regenerate ability, so you have this really nice synergistic cycling that proves dividends. However, we do have Game 2 leads popping out. Jorijn with the Incineroar Landorus versus Diego's Landorus and the Hisuian Arcanine going on the offensive.
Yeah, we've got a bit of a change up from our trainers here. The Incineroar coming out turn 1 from Jorijn, going to drop an all-important Intimidate onto the Hisuian Arcanine. After, of course, Diego's Hisuian Arcanine returned the favor with an Intimidate onto the Incineroar. Not so important yet. Just have to be careful because it wasn't intimidated last time with that head smash and we saw it survive. So not in the greatest position here to be able to get the knockout. Maybe a double up would be enough, but you've got to commit to a Sludge Bomb in that case. And the head smash, is it warranted? And you've got to contend with the fact that Fake Out is an option here for Jorijn on this turn 1 of game 2.
Yeah, it will likely lead to a bit of a defensive play from Diego's side unless they really want to try to capitalize off of going for a Fairy Terrestrialization on the Arcanine in anticipation of the Earth Power focus there, at least preventing Jorijn from getting the safe substitute set up.
Yeah, that's the big thing. I think you want to prevent the substitutes from going up on both sides of the field because we saw how effective it was for Diego in that last game. Once the substitute's up, it's very difficult to deal with because of the coverage that the Landorus Incarnate has. Here we go. Fake Out coming out into the switched in Rillaboom here, going to prevent it from attacking this turn. A huge Earth Power into the Incineroar and a huge knockout.
Wow, that is so detrimental to what we were talking about. The team composition situation of Jorijn's side needs this Incineroar rotation, does get that Landorus substitute set up quite nicely for free in that case, I would say. However, the trade-off of losing the Incineroar is quite substantial.
Huge turn here for Diego, taking an early advantage, getting rid of the Incineroar. It does limit any Fake Out support for the rest of the game. And it's so crucial in certain situations where you want to protect maybe the Porygon 2, if that is the choice of Pokemon brought, or even the Amoonguss to get a Spore off, a Trick Room set up from that Porygon 2, of course. The Amoonguss option coming onto the field now. Going to be a nice Pokemon to bring in front of the Rillaboom and, of course, this Landorus Incarnate.
It's going to be quite interesting, the fact that we didn't see a Porygon 2 brought in there. Maybe a bit of a hint that perhaps it hasn't been brought in this game too, but the Amoonguss does have the direct threat, at least to force a substitute setup from the Landorus to evade a Spore, but the Landorus over on Jorijn's side at least can try to capitalize off getting damage dealt, but the fact that Incineroar is out for the count enables this Hisuian Arcanine to be such a huge threat mid to end game later on.
Yeah, especially if Jorijn can't keep and sustain that substitute, because if it hasn't got the substitute that it's taken in health is going to cost it probably getting knocked out now without that Intimidate, like you quite rightly saying. Big Protect coming out from the Amoonguss, not wanting to take any damage this turn, but a Grassy Glide into that substitute. It does fade, so no longer going to be protecting that Landorus Incarnate on your side of the field. And the Landorus going for its own substitute on Diego's side.
Lovely play from the Landorus over on Diego, being able to quite nicely predict a protect or defensive play on the Amoonguss, and you saw so much damage being dealt from the Lando over on Jorijn's side onto the Rillaboom, nearly picking up a KO. Obviously, a negative direct cause of the Assault Vest not being carried on the Rillaboom.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big problems here. The Sludge Bomb does so much damage here. It is really threatened this next turn from either a Sludge Bomb or a Pollen Pluff. Of course, you can get some last-ditch damage off with a Grassy Glide into that Landorus Incarnate if you choose to do so, but maybe it's worth keeping for later on in this game. Not choosing to do that. Grassy Glide into the Landorus Incarnate.
Trying to follow up with a Sludge Bomb double up, hoping it's enough to pick up the KO. It is not, and you couldn't further boost that with a Poison Terror due to the Steel Terror availability on the Landorus, but it is going to be a bit of a slug, a battle between them both. Substitute, though, does actually break. It allows it to be susceptible to a substitute, to a Spore, which it does connect, so really nice sort of disruption play from Jorijn there.
Yeah, coming back there, really surprised play, probably catching Diego off there, not expecting a Sludge Bomb to come into that slot with the big target on its back, being the Rillaboom, the more obvious play there, but taking and capitalizing off the opportunity, getting rid of the substitute and utilizing the Amoonguss to its maximum potential, putting it to sleep, rendering it useless for this at least next turn. Now, the Rillaboom has to be careful here. It can get taken down by a Pollen Puff here. The Landorus on Jorijn's side could switch out, could protect here. You can't really freely go for a Grassy Glide because it is a little bit risky.
Yeah, it most definitely is going to be risky. Maybe that additional damage output could be an indication of a modest nature on that Landorus over on Jorijn's side to allow to break the substitute, but it does switch out, and it well deserves a rest from all of that. We do have Porygon 2 on the field. It does get, yet again, another special attack boost by the download. It, of course, does sponge up that damage quite nicely, but the Amoonguss on its side of the field does have the Pollen Puff available to recover it back up to 100% health.
Yeah, now the Porygon 2 in a really great position where it is going to be able to get that Trick Room up this next turn, and potentially we're going to have the perfect partner for it next to it, topping it up if it loses any HP with that Pollen Puff, or even disrupting. One of the things that you could do maybe if you're Jorijn is go for that Pollen Puff into the Rillaboom slot, or even really if you feel cheeky enough, go for a Spore into that slot, expecting maybe a switch out to one of those big hitters like the Hisuian Arcanine that could come on and really cause so much detrimental damage, or even the Ogodogi if it is in the back.
I feel like at this point, nothing stops you if you're Jorijn to get a Trick Room set up and be able to threaten those spores under the Trick Room itself. But we're going to have to see and find out from either side of the field. The Landorus does opt to go for the Steel Terrestrialization in order to at least allow itself to not be susceptible to a direct KO from the Ice Beam.
Yeah, it does make it alleviated slightly from the attacks coming out from the Porygon 2. Obviously, the Terra Blast not going to be an issue anymore because of its steel typing. It does wake up as well, and it does get that all-important substitute to further protect it against any future spores and attacks from this Porygon 2.
That is such a critical wake-up in that scenario, because the high threat of the Amoonguss with the spores under Trick Room at least can be negated in the meantime prior to the substitute being broken. But having the pivot action going from the Rillaboom into the Okidogi, most likely from the looks of things, allows yourself to once again have that very free, future safe switch in of the Rillaboom in anticipation of future spores.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, I think, and then you can stall out the Trick Room in the process of doing that, utilize your Landorus by kind of dipping in and out of protecting, attacking, just to wear down everything on your own side of the field. Already lost that Incineroar, so the options are quite limited on that side of the field, even though the Trick Room is set up.
And that's sort of the point of what we've been talking about, Lee. This Amoonguss and Porygon 2 duo just seem to have so much sustainability potential. They can both recover, I would say, to an extent, whether through switch out or self-recovery. Porygon 2 does have recover, but Amoonguss does have Pollen Puff. So if you don't go for a Spore, you can at least go ahead and still opt to go for the recovery onto your partner Pokemon.
Yeah, definitely, and that's the big play here, is the fact that you have that recovery. You can get rid of any initial damage done by both of these Pokemon. I think if you are Porygon 2, you've got to be very careful. You don't want to fall into the same trap as you did in that first game where you get the knockoff coming out and alleviating that pressure with a huge Spore here from the Amoonguss into the Okidogi.
Yeah, Jorijn not wanting to play around at all. It does lock down that slot. Terra Blast will be targeting the Landorus. Is it enough to break the substitute is the question. It is indeed, with that +1 in its special attack. So unless there's another substitute coming out from this Landorus, it is susceptible to a Spore.
Yeah, that's a huge turn here, and showing the power of that download ability, the Earth Power coming into the Amoonguss here. There's a big damage, taking just below 50% health, but like you say, the Landorus in a really awkward position now where it will be susceptible to a Spore. It's almost forced to protect here, and then you're Diego likely having to protect, pivot in the Rillaboom, so you've got that fake out going into the next turn, so it does give you the opportunity to potentially go for a fake out and then a substitute the next turn. All being well, if you can take another Terra Blast from the Porygon 2 that's sitting on +1 special attack.
And what Jorijn needs to try to take into consideration is the next couple of turns. Are you going to be able to get Trick Room set up before Diego has that burst damage available to himself to be able to capitalize off of immediate damage potential?
We are going to see the Amoonguss switch out, activate that Regenerator ability as the Porygon 2 goes for a Terra Blast into the Okidogi, doing some good damage here, just above that 50% mark. The Okidogi stays asleep for another turn as an Earth Power comes out and caught so well by Jorijn as the Landorus switches in on that, not affected by it. Landorus, the big question is, does it underspeed or outspeed in Trick Room that Okidogi?
That is a really good question, actually, and I think we're going to have a bit of a hint potentially in the turn coming up right now, but the situation is as is. We've got the Porygon 2. It seems like it's the main key player in terms of damage output alongside the Landorus. Landorus is in a bit of uncharted territory. I think both of these trainers are most likely aware of this, so they're going to have to try to compensate for that and not risk potentially losing one of those key pieces for their board state.
The big thing is, if the Okidogi wakes up, that is huge, because if it doesn't, it probably goes down to an Earth Power from this Landorus Incarnate. We are going to see the Amoonguss switch in place of that Porygon 2 now, fully recovered a little bit more from that regenerator ability. A big protect coming out from the Landorus Incarnate here. The Okidogi stays asleep, giving a huge opening for that Landorus. Therian going for the Earth Power, picking up a big knockout from Jorijn side of the field. Diego losing a key piece of the puzzle.
That is huge for Jorijn, even though that Landorus is barely surviving on the slither of health. Most crucially, picking up that Okidogi does allow the Porygon 2 more breathing room, which is what it needs. Landorus can easily go for a protect to completely ignore a fake out, and the Amoonguss could also go and try to get a regenerator proc going. However, it needs to still be somewhat threatening the Landorus before it gets another substitute set up.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think the Grassy Glide's such a threat to the Landorus. It really is pressuring it here. You could switch it out, bring in the Porygon. The knockout threat has gone, but you've got to worry about that Spore threat from the Amoonguss here. It could go into the Landorus Incarnate, or you could see even a Pollen Puff just go for that Rillaboom, remove it from the field, try and get it off the field, so then you force out that Hisuian Arcanine and alleviate the pressure from that Grassy Glide pressure as well going forward in the match.
Oh, but it seems like Jorijn opting to at least play a bit more on the safer side, get that Porygon 2 back in on the field, which once again, of course, does get that special attack boost, which is so crucial. It is able to completely scrub off that damage. Spore does connect onto the Landorus. It doesn't go for another protect if it so wanted to in order to risk that. Has been put to sleep, has taken its mandatory sleep turn, but we know that it seems like Diego's wanted to prioritize keeping that Hisuian Arcanine completely safe in the back.
Yeah, and you don't want to bring that in until the Trick Room has ended. I think that's the big key here for Diego. It needs to stall out this Trick Room, bring it in at the right time to utilize the tools that it has available to take down the remaining Pokemon on your side of the field. Everything's slower than it, so it's going to be easy for it to come in. Supported right, of course, to be able to do that, but, of course, easier said than done. Here we are in the Porygon 2 back on the field. We are going to see a Terastallization, this time from your side of the field. What is it going to be on to? And it is that Porygon 2.
It is going to be the Poison Terra, which does threaten a lot of, definitely a KO onto the Rillaboom. I think it is a bit risky, knowing that the Landorus could wake up. It does not wake up, however, and we have the Wood Hammer, which does try to target down the Porygon 2, showing why it's such a good defensive play to try to guarantee a Trick Room setup alongside a very neat Pollen Puff KO onto the Rillaboom, and this is looking really good for Jorijn right now.
Yeah, the Trick Room then going up now with the Porygon 2, and the dimensions twisted for the 5 turns again. Porygon 2 in a great position. What a great Terastallization here from the Porygon 2. Able to take that Wood Hammer so well, utilizing the Amoonguss in a position as well to remove that the Rillaboom from the field. Now that is not a threat. Forcing the Hisuian Arcanine out in a really not great situation, right?
Yeah, it's in a bit of an awkward scenario. The fact that it's just come back onto the field with Trick Room available, the Spore can easily just shut that down at least for one turn. Diego was really hoping to get that one turn wait in order to dispatch of the Porygon 2 with an easy focus down and allow him to run away with this set and clinch his spot in the semifinals. But Jorijn's like, no. I am not going to let you go ahead and do that. I want to be able to go to the semifinals, and I'm going to show you why I am still in the game.
Yeah, and we've got the Spore threat onto that Arcanine here because it is choice banded. It can't protect here. It can't even Terastallize to anything that's going to give it any alleviation from this Spore threat. So a big opportunity here to put it to sleep. But if you do that, you are threatened of a wake-up from that Landorus Incarnate that does threaten that now. Poison Terra type Porygon 2 with super effective damage from that Earth Power.
It's not over just yet. Terra Blast Poison focusing down onto the Hisuian Arcanine, not dealing any sort of respectable damage, if I do say so myself. Does take its mandatory sleep, but the question is, does Landorus wake up? It does not wake up, so once again in the spot where it's not able to get that damage dealt. However, we are in an awkward scenario for this Porygon 2, Lee, where it's hitting resists left, right, and center, so it's not able to pick up, let's say, a 2-hit KO in order to seal this game straight up for Jorijn.
Yeah, and that is the problem. I think you really need to reposition, get your your Landorus onto the field. It is going to be difficult, though, because if you bring your Landorus onto the field, you risk maybe even a stray Sludge Bomb coming out into that slot or whatever the Arcanine decides to do. Of course, you do have the Amoonguss positioned pretty well in this scenario where it can draw in those attacks. Maybe that's what you do. You try and use that Rage Powder, switch in to your Landorus to get it into a spot where it can deal with the Steel type and the Arcanine.
Ooh, Ice Beam is dispatched onto the Landorus, looking like a rough 3 to 4 hit KO onto the remaining HP of the Landorus, but there is also another win condition that Jorijn has identified being the timer. However, Sludge Bomb focusing onto the Moonguss doesn't quite hit that 2-shot KO range that it really wanted to do, but like I just mentioned, there is timer, and we know that Jorijn has 3 Pokemon available to himself versus Diego's 2.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. The timer will be a huge player here, and it is ticking down very slowly. We are going to see potentially the Landorus threatened by a Spore again this turn. So does it force Diego to go for a Protect? If it does, it plays into the whole thing of the timer here, where Jorijn is really clutching at that advantage that he has with these 3 Pokemon to 2 on Diego's side.
Ooh, as the Spore does focus down, no Protects from the Landorus in order to allow itself to negate that. But the Arcanine is in a spot where it may or may not wake up. Ice Beam not quite enough to either pick up a freeze due to the sleep or a KO. Arcanine is asleep yet again, and we're seeing time whittle down even further. Not what Diego is likely wanted to see here. However, there's a scenario where this Arcanine is potentially guaranteed a wake up in the next turn.
And I think that's the big thing, because once that Arcanine does wake up, the grassy terrain's gone now. Once it wakes up, it is going to be able to, you know, easily pick up a knockout onto the Amoonguss. It can't terrestrialize. We've had that committed on the Porygon 2, so Flare Blitz into that slot going to probably be enough to pick up the knockout there. And if you see a Flare Blitz into that slot and it even switches out, the Landorus that is in the back for Jorijn enough to easily take that down, dispatch that. We are seeing the Porygon 2 lock in with a recover here, and the Arcanine finally waking up, locking in with that Flare Blitz now into the Protect of the Amoonguss.
Into the Amoonguss, whilst the Porygon 2 completely freely goes ahead, gets the recovery. We do not see any wake up from the Landorus, which is so crucial right here. But Jorijn does still have some options available, but doesn't have that direct immediate pressure. Arcanine is looking to be in a good spot to try to get that damage that Diego's been chasing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You need the damage output just isn't there for Jorijn, which is the big problem at the moment. We are going to see a Rage Powder from the Amoonguss pulling in all of those attacks from the Landorus. If it can wake up, it does stay asleep, but the Flare Blitz, more importantly, going to come out from this Hisuian Arcanine. Is it going to be enough? You would expect so. Into the Amoonguss, picking up a huge knockout.
Huge knockout, forcing Jorijn to his final 2 Pokemon. The critical hit definitely not mattering in that scenario. We know how bulky this Amoonguss is, but it's facing down the choice-banded Hisuian Arcanine. Trick Room has been set up yet again. Most crucially, we have the Landorus most likely being able to underspeed both of Diego's Pokemon and allow itself to force focus an Earth Power threat into either Pokemon.
Yeah, now you're in a great position if you're Jorijn. He set this up perfectly, where now the Landorus comes in under the Trick Room. Going to be able to dismember the Arcanine, dispatch of it, get rid of it with that Earth Power here, and then utilize the Porygon 2 that's got access to the Ice Beam, and then that recovery, which is just going to be enough to whittle down the remaining Landorus Incarnate that's going to struggle to deal with that Porygon 2.
And neither of these trainers are backing down. They're really trying to put out all the stops and get that advantageous position into the board state for themselves. Ice Beam not enough to pick up a KO, but guess what is? The Earth Power into Hisuian Arcanine, leaving this Landorus down to its final few HP, whilst being susceptible. Even though it does wake up, it does go for the Sludge Bomb into the Landorus. It is going to be very tough to try to outlast the final couple of turns of Trick Room.
Yeah, and I think if you are Diego, you've got to do it. You've got to try and go for those protects here, because if you don't, you are in Ice Beam range, and that's all the Porygon 2 needs to do. Get 1 Ice Beam off and close this matchup. Your best chance is to stall out these turns of Trick Room, put yourself in a position. Not going to see it. The Ice Beam coming out, picking up the knockout, and it is taking us to a Game 3.
Game 3 is on the way. Alert, alert, everybody. Jorijn has been able to go ahead and bring this set back somehow to force his situation into the semi-finals. It I do want to call out there, Lee. There were 8 seconds remaining of your time over on Diego's side. So maybe he took into consideration he doesn't even have enough time to go and stroll down to the protect button in order to dispatch of this Porygon 2.
Not enough time to even select the protect, just locking in with a move as soon as possible. Absolutely down to the wire in that last one, tying this match up. Both players showing how much they want to move on into that top 4. This is incredible. We've got some replays from that last match. The big turn on turn 1 here, where the Earth Power went into the Incineroar, getting rid of it very early on in this game, making it difficult for Jorijn to get any momentum here, but managed to do so. That big sludge bomb into the substitute was enough to get rid of it, and then doubling into that slot with the Spore, putting it to sleep, giving Jorijn the room to get the Porygon 2 in, get the Trick Room up, and then slowly start clawing this match back.
It's what we were talking about. You need to be able to remove those pivotal points of pieces on either trainer's side in order to allow more wiggle room to get away with things. Earth Power being able to pick up the KO onto the Okidogi that had, of course, been put to sleep. Amoonguss really putting out all of the stops there for Jorijn with 2 KOs. Or at least not 2 KOs, but that 1 KO of the Pollen Puff into the Rillaboom, which, you know, can be utilized both for your partner Pokemon, but in this case, on a non-Assault Vest, Rillaboom can actually dispatch and get the job done.
Yeah, of course. And, do you think we'll see any switch-ups going into this next game? Of course, game 3, everything on the line here. I think both players may expect either the opponent to bring what they've brought in the last 2 games. Maybe that's where you can get a little bit of an advantage. You can maybe feel that out, bring something that puts you in a better position against what you are seeing brought. Maybe that Chen Pao could be something that you could see from Diego led off with.
I feel like both trainers feel that it's most appropriate to wage in with the same Pokemon, if I'm completely honest, but it's just more so on their mental stamina at this point. Are they going to be able to push through and force their way into the situation, as we do have a bit of a change-ups, at least with the leads themselves. Jorijn has the Porygon 2 and Landorus over on their end versus Diego's Okidogi and Landorus of their own, and this is it. This is game 3. After this, we will find out who our next semi-finalist is.
You've got to say right here that Jorijn has put himself in a great position to pressure everything on Diego's side of the field. The Earth Power coming out, maybe forcing a Terastallization if you want to keep that Okidogi on the field, and also the Ice Beam as well from that Porygon 2, because you are protecting your Porygon 2 from that Okidogi with the Earth Power, and the Ice Beam going to really be a detriment to that Landorus, maybe even forcing a Terastallization here. So Diego in a spot where he does need to readjust or make some big moves to get any sort of momentum swing in this first game of game 3.
And I feel like the Rillaboom should likely be the safe switch in if it does opt to go for it. However, we have switch up of the Porygon 2 wanting to at least potentially maintain not only its health, but even its Eviolite item. But no switch out of the Okidogi here. Landorus does set up that substitute over on Diego's side. Earth Power will be targeting the Okidogi, and it just barely survives on 5 hit points. Knockoff does target down the Amoonguss. Will be knocking off that Rocky Helmet only after getting KO'd by its own self.
What a huge turn here from Jorijn, making a huge switch in to the Amoonguss, knowing that potentially there's a knockoff coming into that slot, and if it does survive the Earth Power, the Rocky Helmet will be enough to get rid of that Okidogi, give him a huge lead here. The one thing you would say Diego's done well is get that substitute, prioritize that, because it does mean that your Landorus is in a much safer position. And now the Okidogi going down, but the Hisuian Arcanine coming onto the field, and we've seen how threatening that can be in the face of this Amoonguss and the Landorus.
Even though the Okidogi has gone out for Diego, this is a really advantageous position for himself. He could easily try to go for the Terastallization on the Arcanine to allow itself to no longer be susceptible to a one-hit KO from the Landorus, opt to go for the Rock Slide, try to get a Earth Power focus onto the Amoonguss too, but you need to take into consideration an Incineroar switching over on Jorijn's side.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. I think if you do see the Intimidate coming onto the field now, which is a lot easier now that Okidogi's left the field, it has been getting rid of, so the Incineroar free to come on, not have to worry about the Guard Dog. Drop that all-important Intimidate onto that Hisuian Arcanine, freeing up the Landorus on your side of the field to get some big damage off. But scouted out by Diego, going for that huge Earth Power, picking up the Incineroar as it switches in for Jorijn.
And all of a sudden, we've already got 2 KOs, 1 apiece from either side in what has been a grueling stall-like switch-up gameplay from these trainers. Rock Slide, single target, but the question is, does it pick up the flinch? It picks up the flinch, and all of a sudden, Landorus doesn't get that critical KO onto the Arcanine.
You've got to say everything here is falling in Diego's favor this turn, setting the substitute up, catching the Incineroar on the switch in, and then fishing for the flinch with that Rock Slide, getting it, putting himself in the driving seat in this match after it looked bleak after that turn 1.
However, what we need to try to think about is Diego's Pokemon. Are they capable of picking up a KO or perhaps even another flinch on this Porygon 2? It does threaten that Trick Room yet again, something that Jorijn at this point will likely have to try to wage in on in order to allow the Amoonguss to get those critical spores up later on in the game.
Yeah, and the one thing that you could say is Diego's still got access to Terastallization. We've seen in Games 1 and Game 2 where leaning on that Steel Terror type for the Landorus, it does give you a bit of alleviation against the Porygon 2 and the threats on that side of the field, but it does make you weaker to the Landorus. Incarnate's moves, we aren't seeing it. Earth Power straight into the Porygon 2.
Dealing so much damage, but the Arcanine Rock Slide does double connect onto both the Landorus and the Porygon 2. Does it pick up? Oh my lord! It picks up a second flinch onto the Landorus. However, the most critical flinch would have been onto the Porygon 2.
That is huge. Again, another flinch preventing the Landorus from getting any attack damage off. But the key thing is the Porygon 2 wasn't flinch. It was able to get through that turn, set the Trick Room up, flip the dimensions. Now everything back in Jorijn's favor where he can capitalize here. Go for that Earth Power into the Arcanine, pick up a knockout into that slot and start dealing damage, more importantly, to that Landorus behind the substitute on Diego's side of the field.
Diego does have the option of getting that rotation of the Rillaboom coming in order to sort of circumvent that Earth Power KO onto it, but no switch outs here. Landorus goes for the protect. Diego maybe wanted to just try to play straight forward here and not anticipate any targeting slots that Jorijn may read into. Recover being so nice for the longevity of this Porygon 2, but the Landorus, it does target down the Arcanine, it does go for the Earth Power, and all of a sudden, Diego, the gamble there didn't quite work out for themselves.
No, definitely not a big workout there. Maybe thinking that a Sludge Bomb was coming into that slot so could get some additional damage off, but really backfiring here. Diego down to the last 2 Pokemon. Yes, he has got a substitute up on that Landorus Incarnate, but for how long will that keep it safe? You've still got Terastallization to utilize, but do you want to go for it with your Rillaboom? Not really, because it's the Fire Terror type. Do you want to go for it with your Landorus? Maybe. It gives you a bit of alleviation from the Porygon 2, but puts you weaker against those Earth Powers.
Exactly, and it sort of feels like Diego may have to try to take into consideration a further substitute play in order to allow his Landorus to better negate those spores that may be coming down further the line. Rillaboom, speed interactions here will be interesting versus this very slow Landorus over on Jorijn's side, but it will be looking to try to get massive amounts of damage if it so can do so.
Yeah, but not wanting to take any damage this turn as the Amoonguss comes in for the Landorus. The Fake Out coming out into the Porygon 2, a really good move because it isn't going to be able to move this turn as the Earth Power is fired out from the Landorus to get some additional damage onto that Porygon 2. Really respectable damage here, taking it just below 50% health.
Just below 50, however, this Rillaboom can ignore the Amoonguss redirection. It is susceptible to relative super effective Pollen Puffs coming out its side. But the Landorus, right now, it needs to be able to have breathing room to get those very powerful Earth Powers up, but now has to be very critical over the opposing Landorus switch-ins that could be able to completely immunify those attacks.
Yeah, and you don't only have to worry about the spores coming out if the substitute is broken, but the Pollen Puffs that are going to keep that Porygon 2 topped up, which is what we're going to see here, keeping that Porygon 2 healthy while it deals the big damage necessary to potentially break that substitute and also take down that Rillaboom.
Oh, Ice Beam nearly picking up the KO there. The Woodhammer self-recoil would have likely been able to do so. So Earth Power now bringing it within the range of potentially a Grassy Glide KO here, Lee.
Potentially, but the Grassy terrain recovery there might have just put it out of range here, depending on the damage roll that we'll see going into this next turn. The big thing is, though, the Rillaboom now in a really awkward position where it takes another Pollen Puff from the Amoonguss or an Ice Beam from this Porygon 2, and it goes down, and then it becomes a big turn. Oh. Here we go. It does survive the Grassy Glide. Another big Pollen Puff into that Porygon 2 to keep it healthy. But what does that Landorus do?
The Landorus will not be able to move just yet. The Terra Blast, though, does pick up the KO onto the Rillaboom. Diego's Landorus is not completely out of this situation. If it can pick up a KO, it can better place itself going into this end game, but it does not. No critical hits, which would have enabled him to do so. We know that the Trick Room turns are now expired, so this may lead into a Landorus switch in over Jorijn's side based on which slot he thinks Diego is going to target.
And I think, though, it's so much safer just to Rage Powder with your Amoonguss at this point and allow the Porygon 2 to set the Trick Room up. Then you've got that situation once again where you can go for the Pollen Puff the next turn and then start chipping away at the Landorus on Diego's side of the field.
Really nice, safe redirection here. It will still be able to survive, most likely. Sludge Bomb, of course, we know no Poison Terror is available on the Landorus, dealing very minimal amounts of damage there. Trick Room has been set up. This is Jorijn's domain at the moment. He's looking to try to run through with picking up his semi-final spot.
And it looks like Diego has resigned himself, that there is no way back after that Trick Room has went up. It might be a forfeit locked in here, but the thing is, the Porygon 2 is in that position where the Pollen Puff can just keep topping up that Porygon 2. You can only keep the substitute up for so long, and we do see Jorijn take this game in top 8, moving on into top 4 of the EUIC Championships here in London.
Jorijn being able to sort of make the impossible possible and find a way to reverse, win this set out in the way that he did. There were so many different interactions to take into considerations. We discovered quite a bit there, Lee. There was a lot of speed mechanics to sort of take note of. There are a lot of different side plays that could have been made, the Pollen Puffs, the Spores. There are so many different branches they could have gone down by, and the fact that we had the team archetypes and compositions being the way that they were made it for the situation where you need to try to get rid of the 1 or 2 critical KOs to allow no switches to get those rotations going.
That was a true blue top 8 match, wasn't it? Really, the blueprint of a top 8 match. What? Backwards and forwards, like you say, identifying the speed positions throughout the game. But that pin at the end, where Jorijn identified, he was able to get the Trick Room up, get that Porygon 2 next to the Amoonguss, keep utilizing that Pollen Puff to just keep it healthy enough to get rid of the Rillaboom, and then once that was done, the Landorus stood no chance, and I think that was just an incredible game from start to finish. The turn 1 Earth Power into the Okidogi, the switch into the Amoonguss, the Rocky Helmet picking up a huge early lead.
Yeah, that was quite tough because you lost the Okidogi, which could have really paid dividends for yourself towards the mid-game, being able to directly threaten the Porygon 2, get that recovery going. Having the Guard Dog boost as well is always nice when you're going up against such a tight-knit core of the Incineroar cycling with the Amoonguss. But that flinch there, following through with a double flinch, did seem to be huge going into the Landorus, but I feel like the Trick Room being enabled is the key player there that Jorijn was able to completely take advantage of.
Yeah, if we saw a flinch there on the Porygon 2, I think that would have been game up and Diego would be moving on and not Jorijn. But thankfully for Jorijn, the flinch not happening, and then able to get that Trick Room up, get this board position like we're seeing now with the Amoonguss, with that Pollen Puff, able to keep the Porygon 2 topped up and allow it to get the damage off that it needed. Look how close that was to getting knocked out every time with a combination of Grassy Glide and the Earth Power.
Yeah, you could see Jorijn absolutely ecstatic, saying, wow, this is actually, I was able to get through, and in what fashion as well. But we're going to be hearing from the man himself, Jorijn. So go ahead, Charlie, and take it away.
Trainers here in the venue, how amazing was that? An absolutely incredible match. Congratulations to you, Jorijn. You must be feeling ecstatic.
Thank you. I'm feeling very happy. I was very nervous, and well, I'm just happy I won.
Yeah, it was such an intense game. The mind games, you were able to keep your cool, calm and collected. Now, I want to talk about that Porygon 2. It was sticking around on the field for so long. Pollen Puff able to heal it back up. How's Porygon 2 been your most valuable Pokemon?
Yes, it survives everything you want. You can just keep using Recover. The coverage with ice and poison is good. It did a lot of work for me.
If I could get you to hold your microphone just slightly closer to your
Yeah.
mouth, thank you very much. Yes, all the recovering, all the Pollen Puff, really, really hard to knock out. But in game one, of course, the Eviolite was knocked off by the Incineroar. Talk to us about how you felt then.
Honestly, I don't really remember that much anymore.
Fair enough. It was hours ago.
Yes.
No problem at all. And then the other two games, you were just able to set up Trick Room when you needed it, stall it out when you needed it. How crucial was Trick Room for you in this game?
Yeah, it was very important because both the Arcanine and the Landorus for my opponent were faster than my Landorus. And Landorus was the best way I could do damage to my opponent. So I had to keep getting Trick Room up again and again.
Yes, and you absolutely succeeded in that. Yeah. And I also wanted to ask about going into team preview. You see Okie Dogie on your opponent's team sheet. What do you think then?
Yeah, that's a Pokemon I haven't really seen before. So I just had to think about how to deal with the Pokemon, on the go. And well, it has the Jolt Vest, so Landorus can't Oko it, but Landorus is still very good against it. I just had to be careful with not bringing in Incineroar because that boosts its attack.
Thanks to the guard dog ability, absolutely. Well, Jorijn, we're going to let you get ready for your top four. Congratulations, thank you for joining us. Trainers, we got top four coming up very soon.